Hi, folks. Welcome into the It's Official podcast. Jeremy Plonk here for First Bet and Express Bet. We'll talk 5 topics in horse racing like we do each and every week in just a moment, but I want to share a little bit of information about the show here. Of course, my co-founder and co-host on the show for many years, Jeff Siegel. Got a surprise phone call from Jeff yesterday. He's doing as well as can be expected in Southern California. It was great to hear his voice for the first time in a little over a month for me, and keep sending those good thoughts and prayers to Mr. Siegel. It was good and uplifting for me, and I think for him as well, to chat. We talked a little bit about horses, maybe his comeback that he's hoping to make in the fall. So all systems positive for Mr. Siegel. Let's keep those good vibes and good thoughts in your prayers in his corner. Certainly would love to see him back on the podcast. Told him, obviously, I am just holding his seat warm for him for when he's ready to return. So that would be the Goosebump Award in any given week. I just got them actually talking about it here on the podcast as we record. But each week, the Goosebump Award is what Jeff wanted to start things out with on this show beginning at the 1st of 2025. So let's talk about the horse who did the most commanding performance on the racetrack last week, the one that got us up out of our seat, got us excited about the sport of kings. How about Doncho, the 4-year-old making his turf sprint debut? Not only did he run well and win at Ellis Park, he set a world record.
So at the top of the lane, it still is Doncho as the lead, and Mustache is in a perfect spot. Can he come and get Doncho? Doncho is brave with the lead. Mustache is second to Bob, has room now, but he has a lot of ground to make up on Doncho, who keeps on going at a big number. Doncho's 11-1, and he goes all the way. The Bob is into second.
5.5 furlongs on the turf and 59.75 by 5 hundredths of a second faster than what we saw in the world record set last year by Cogburn on the turf at Saratoga. So a new world record, 5.5 on the turf, 59.75 for the 4-year-old Michelle Lovell trainee. This gelding started off his career winning his first 2 and looked like he could be anything in the winter of 2024. Went on the bench then for 10 months. This was his 3rd start off the layoff, and this was the promise that he showed in winning 3 of his first 4 career starts. Maybe the second half of the year will be about Doncho, and we can keep this horse fit and sound. He's a gelding now, so he could run on for quite some time. Very exciting prospect. The one thing about Ellis Park is if there is a turf course that a dirt horse is going to take to anywhere in America, it is Ellis Park. I think it really plays kindly to short crop pool table type turf course. Plays really well to dirt speed. Sam Houston, similar if you've ever bet the races down there in Houston. So Doncho's got to prove it probably on a little bit longer turf course, more true turf course. Will he be that good of a turf sprinter, say at Keeneland or at Churchill? Maybe we'll find out in the fall. Certainly the Keeneland Fall Meet, plenty of chances to run big time races. You got, races like the Shakertown, the Woodford at Keeneland during those meets, getting primed. I don't know about a Breeders' Cup turf sprint prospect, but Del Mar is a very short crop turf course as well. Only 5/8 of a mile for the Breeders' Cup turf sprint. Maybe Doncho has thrown his hat in the ring. I know this, though. He may not be a Breeders' Cup turf sprinter, but he's certainly this week's Goosebump Award winner. Great performance there. Honorable mention also came from Ellis Park. Big Truz ran a big one in the Ellis Park Derby. This was a 3-year-old at Keeneland who we just loved off his debut win for Brendan Walsh. I thought he'd have a big win in him sometime this year. He kind of disappointed a little bit in some of the other regional derbies, but it was a breakout effort from Big Truz in winning the Ellis Park Derby. We'll see where he goes. Maybe he could be a Breeders' Cup dirt mile type runner. We see some 3-year-olds that are in between distance that sort of fit there in the Breeders' Cup dirt mile from year to year. We'll see how that shakes out. Let's keep the talk about the Breeders' Cup as we move to topic number 2 here. And we're talking about the turfers. It was a big week on the grass in the U.S. last week, but the American Turf Division didn't put any superstars forward, I don't think. In fact, it was kind of a low-watt performance in the Arlington Million and the Sword Dancer. The Sword Dancer won by a shipper for Godolphin. We'll talk about that. The Arlington Million won, of course, by Fort Washington. A nice grade 3, grade 2 type horse, but not going to be mistaken for one of the bricks and mortar types, main sequence types coming out of America towards the Breeders' Cup. Here's Fort Washington winning at Colonial Downs, and we'll talk about it.
And Integration still biding his time. Out in the clear is 4th, now starting to inch forward in those green colors. Another length to Grand Sonata. Cairo starting to let loose. Hasn't been asked yet in Fort Washington Trails. Time Song still the leader around at the top of the stretch, tries to kick away. Mystic Dan's running a good one in the first time on the lawn. Is just 2 lengths back. Integration, Cairo getting into gear on the outside. Time Song, company is coming. Here's Mystic Dan, here's Integration, here's Cairo. Fort Washington letting loose right down the far outside as a tremendous kick. Grand Sonata goes to the rail. There's 6 across the course. Fort Washington, Integration, Grand Sonata, Mystic Dan right there in between them. 4 of them across. Fort Washington goes narrowly to the front. Grand Sonata down toward the inside. Integration is beaten today. Fort Washington, Grand Sonata, Fort Washington wins the Arlington Million.
Fort Washington gets up the win over Grand Sonata, who's run 2 bangers in a row, only to finish second. Grand Sonata second in the United Nations, and then, of course, coming back here in the Arlington Million. But these are not top-class turfers here in the, maybe amongst the U.S., but I don't even know if they're the top of the division here in the U.S. You've got Spirit of St. Louis, who's probably had the best year amongst the American turf horses, but he's an in-between distance horse. Not really a mile and a half for the Breeders' Cup turf, and certainly not a miler cutting back so much for the Breeders' Cup mile. So Spirit of St. Louis is kind of stuck in between a little bit where he may be best. Fort Washington, certainly the longer they go, the better. 1.25 miles for him. He had good brisk late pace figures. That came in as a good handicapping angle on there for trainer Shug McGahee. And Fort Washington got the victory under Junior Alvarado in the Arlington Million. What a year for Junior Alvarado. Of course, Sovereignty has taken him to places higher than he's ever been in his career, and now he adds an Arlington Million in what is a dream season. I still think Jose Ortiz may be a leader right now for the Eclipse Award, but certainly Irad Ortiz closing in on that. And Junior Alvarado is going to get a lot of votes for the big races he's won. Breeders' Cup could determine the Eclipse Award for champion jockey this year, who has the big signature wins in the championship event. Fort Washington, probably not a Breeders' Cup turf runner, though. Shug has been smart about placing this horse where he belongs, mostly at the grade 2, grade 3 kind of level. He caught an easy field, I think, here in the Arlington Million. That field did include the grade 1 winner, Mystic Dan, the Kentucky Derby winner from 2024. You saw in the replay there, Mystic Dan poked a nose in front in upper stretch, but didn't have the same finishing kick on the turf as he did on dirt. Kind of an in-between run for him. I think he had to do a little bit of the dirty work early, chasing the 40-1 runaway early leader in the race. Maybe could have been a little bit more patient. Then got stuck between horses around the far turn. Never a breather in that kind of trip. But Mystic Dan, to me, was kind of so flat late in the race that he didn't impress me as a turfer. I don't know where they move on from here. Kenny McPeak talked about, do you go to the Breeders' Cup Classic? Do you cut back and try to run the mile in the Breeders' Cup on the grass, or the dirt mile? The dirt mile probably fits him best, actually, amongst the class level of horses and his skill set. Of course, he did win the Kentucky Derby at 1.25 miles, but some of his better races and his better turn of foot have been in a little bit shorter distances. I think Breeders' Cup dirt mile would be the best way to go with Mystic Dan moving forward, and try to get to that race the best way you can find for McPeak. You could certainly go west and look at the Awesome Again at 1.125 miles at Santa Anita if you want to go on the West Coast and not have to run 1.25 miles in a prep race. And then you can kind of decide coming out of that 1.125 miles which way you would want to go. McPeak's been out there to Santa Anita with Mystic Dan, of course, last year, December 26th, the end of last year, running in the Malibu. He didn't run and pick up a foot that day, but we'll see if they want to go west with Mystic Dan before the Breeders' Cup. Maybe something at Churchill or even Keeneland. You could, consider something there, maybe the Fayette or something. But I think prep-wise and getting to the Breeders' Cup for Mystic Dan, best place for him, I think, moving forward will be the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. As for some of these other low-wattage star performances this weekend in the Breeders' Cup Turf Division here amongst the American horses, Farbridge was coming off a win in the Bowling Green. He ran a good third in the Manhattan behind Deterministic. Deterministic arguably is the best American turf horse. He and Spirit of St. Louis kind of in that mix, I think. Farbridge had a chance to kind of stamp himself in the Sword Dancer grade 1 at Saratoga over the weekend. But this turned out to be Charlie Appleby with Godolphin shipping in. They didn't even bring one of their big hitters in. They brought 2, and they won it with the lesser of the pair. El Cordobas getting the victory here, and a bit of a surprise under Flavian Pratt. They won the Sword Dancer with a heady ride.
Buick turning for home. El Razine is unwinding from the back of the field. He's coming very wide, but with 1 furlong to go, it's Nation's Pride with a 3-length advantage. Big effort from Rebel Red, who's coming after him now, and El Cordobes splits rivals decisively. Here's El Cordobes in between horses, and he comes to take the lead, and he will win the Resorts World Casino Sword Dancer under a patient
Gets the victory. You saw it in the white cap. That's how you know when you look at the Godolphin runners, which one's the A horse and which one's the B. The A horse is going to be in the all blue, the royal blue colors. The lesser horses are going to get the different caps. And you got the white cap there on El Cordobes. And of course, William T. Buick, the jockey on Nation's Pride, coming over to ride that one and not riding a horse he had been the regular rider for in El Cordobes. So they got a jockey change to Flavian Pratt, but it was certainly a sign that they thought Nation's Pride was their stronger of the two. Will El Cordobes be a horse that we see towards Del Mar and the Breeders' Cup Turf? Would make some sense coming out of this 1.5-mile race. We'll see. Godolphin obviously has a big hand to play in the Breeders' Cup Turf division each and every year. But the Americans, when we talk about it for the Breeders' Cup Turf, they're really not in the discussion this year. And most years they aren't either. The Europeans have won the Breeders' Cup Turf 9 of the last 10 years. In the last 20 years, only 3 American horses have won the Breeders' Cup Turf. You got to go back 2007, English Channel at Monmouth. Little Mike for Dale Romans picked up a Breeders' Cup Turf win. And then, of course, Bricks and Mortar for Chad Brown. Really the best of the pure American horses to win the Breeders' Cup Turf in the last 20 years. So you've got to figure we're coming from overseas again, and maybe it's Godolphin all over again with El Cordobes. But Godolphin still has the 2-time Breeders' Cup Turf winner to talk about in Rebels Romance. He won the Breeders' Cup Turf in 2022. He won it again last year in 2024. The 7-year-old was back in action over the past weekend, the Grand Prix of Berlin. We're going to give you a little German race call here to see if the 7-year-old could notch his 8th career grade or Group 1 victory. Jeff loved these on the podcast when we'd play some international race calls. Get your German skills sharpened here for the big race in Berlin. Rebels Romance going for 8 Grade 1 wins.
Romance außen daneben ist straight zu sehen. Dahinter probiert sich hier Cold Heart. Vorne aber Rebels Romance im Kampf mit Junko. Dahinter hier straight mit Cold Heart. Außen greift Nastaria an. Narrativa in letzter Position, aber Rebels Romance ist voraus. 300 Meter bis zum Ziel. Rebels Romance vor Junko, der kämpft in der Nummer weiter. Rebels Romance vor Junko. Dritter ist Cold Heart. Dahinter dann Nastaria. Die letzten 100 Meter stehen gleich an. Junko kommt nochmal näher an Rebels Romance. Rebels Romance oder Junko, das ist die Frage. Rebels Romance mit seinem 8. Gruppe 1 Sieg und der erste für den Jockey Billy Lochman. Rebels Romance gewinnt und schlägt Junko, dritter wird Cold Heart, dann Abstand zu Nastaria.
We know he can handle the trip to the U.S. We know he can fly all over the world. I saw a graphic on X earlier this week that estimated 65,000 air miles for the career now for Rebels Romance, traveling around to these different races. That was his 8th Group 1 win from 19 lifetime victories from 28 starts. He's earned more than $11 million. What a career for Rebels Romance. We expect to see him in North America. Another shot here. He is going to head to Woodbine October 4th, the Canadian International is what Charlie Appleby said is next for this 7-year-old. So he'll head to Woodbine first week of October, Canadian International, and then that sets him up to go back to Del Mar to try to defend his title and become a 3-time winner of the Breeders' Cup Turf if able to do it. Very select company, 3-time Breeders' Cup winner. So we will see if Rebels Romance can do it. But as we saw this past week, America's got some low-watt stars in the turf division, maybe Deterministic, maybe Spirit of St. Louis. But what we saw in the Arlington Million and what we saw in the Sword Dancer isn't going to scare any of the Europeans. We go to our third topic this week on the big board on the It's Official podcast. No surprise, but Bob Baffert's 2-year-olds are just tearing up the competition at Del Mar. They're mopping the track with them. Baffert babies have won 6 times at the meet. Let's talk about some of these 2-year-olds that he's just winning by daylight with. These are the 6 winners that Baffert's had since the Del Mar meet started a little over 3 weeks ago. Brandt won a maiden special by 5 1/4. Butane by 3 1/2. Balboa won this past weekend by 7 3/4 lengths, breaking his maiden. What's significant about that? He ran against Brandt earlier in the meet and got his head handed to him. And then he came back and won by nearly 8 lengths. Battle of Rouge won by 6 3/4. Desert Gate won in Stakes Company. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. The Best Pal Stakes winning by 8 3/4, the biggest margin of the Baffert winners this meet. And then Hamika won the Sorrento Stakes for the 2-year-old fillies by daylight as well this past weekend. Let's take a look at Desert Gate for Bob Baffert, winning his top 2-year-old stakes so far this year on the road to the Del Mar Futurity. This was the Best Pal this past weekend.
Desert Gate has opened up here at the top of the stretch. Opening up by 3. Punto 40 gives way on the inside. Pavlovian's down the center. Then comes Brigante, but it is Desert Gate. Oh, this is a romp. In hand and in command, Desert Gate dominates the Best Pal. Pavlovian was second. Brigante was third.
Another note about that, Desert Gate had been a workmate in the morning with Brandt. And Brandt pretty much jerked a knot at him in the morning. It just looked like the far superior racehorse. So if that horse wins by 8 3/4, Desert Gate in the Best Pal Stakes, how good is Brandt? Brandt looks like an obvious favorite right now towards the big one at the end of the meet, the Del Mar Futurity. And then, of course, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile this year back at Del Mar. So Baffert's got a very, very strong hand to play. We were saying that Baffert's 2-year-olds last year going into the Breeders' Cup didn't look quite as superstar-ish as we're used to with the Bafferts, and he ended up running 1-2 or 1-3 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. Citizen Bull winning the race at a big price. So even in the years with the 2-year-olds where you don't think Baffert has the goods, often he does. Well, here at Del Mar this summer, it's all about the Baffert 2-year-olds. You know, I'm not the biggest fan in the world of the Baffert Charges, but you've got to call it as you see it. And right now, he is dominating with the 2-year-olds. 13 starters at the meet amongst the 2-year-olds, 6 wins, 3 seconds, 9 for 13 in the exacta amongst the Bafferts. And Baffert, in fact, has won 8 straight races in which he's entered a horse at Del Mar. He's had a couple losses in there because they lost the Baffert horses, but the last 8 races he's had a starter in, he's won 8 in a row at Del Mar. One of those came on Sunday, that being Hamika in the Sorrento Stakes. Let's take a look at her fascial victory.
As the lead as they come toward the top of the stretch from Thank You India. Stuffy Mist comes wide for the stretch drive. My Cat and Mow Him Down into the stretch, and Hamika comes to the 8th pole, and now her lead is up to 3. Into second is Mow Him Down. Then Thank You India to the outside. Juan Hernandez and Hamika will win the Sorrento. They're coming down to the wire, geared down by 5. Mow Him Down second, and then Thank You India and My Cat.
Easy victory in the Sorrento. We'll see if the Bafferts keep that roll going. He's got an $800,000 purchase entered for maiden claiming 20 when Del Mar resumes the racing card on Thursday. We'll see if that victory gets him a 9th straight at the meet race that Baffert has entered. Now, let's talk about a topic last week that had everybody abuzz. The final race on the card Saturday at Saratoga. When it was post time, they were at the gate, but where exactly was the gate for that turf finale? Expected to go at 1 1/8 miles, but the gate crew set the gate at the 1 16 starting point, and therefore the race, no one picked it up ahead of time. The stewards didn't intervene, and the race ran at 1 16 miles. Controversially, the winner was on the front end. One of the closers came up a little bit short in third in rallying. And after David Grenning of the Racing Forum, whom I believe is the first to point this out publicly, the race had already gone official before they were notified that the race wasn't run at the proper distance. So the stewards made the race official. Nobody paid attention to the distance loading or through the course of the race or in the payout stage and making the race official in adjudicating it. Therefore, the results stood. The prices stood. There were no refunds. And it put NYRA, the New York Racing Association, and the stewards themselves in a bit of a public relations mode. On Sunday, they got together and put out this statement on X. I'm going to play it in full so you can watch it. This is the explanation. Andy Serling from the Fox crew and the New York Racing Association with Andrew Offerman, one of the VP of operations for NYRA, high-level executive in the NYRA racing team. He's on the set with them. And then a couple of the stewards who were a part of the decision. 3 stewards work the booth. If you're not familiar with horse racing, they're like the referees or the judges in boxing or in gymnastics. Their job is to make sure that everything goes off smoothly. Everything is to the rules that apply to the race, that the race is run cleanly and fairly. And one of their responsibilities, obviously, is that the race is run at the right distance. Here's their explanation. We'll play it in full, and then we'll come back and talk about the incident more.
As many of you know, Saturday, August 9th, the 12th race was run at the wrong distance. Coming to talk about this, two of the three stewards, we want to thank you for showing up. Victor Escobar from the New York Racing Association, Cody Watkins from the Jockey Club, as well as Andrew Offerman, the Senior Vice President of Racing Operations, here to talk about Saturday's incident.
Thank you, Andy. As you stated, at the 12th race yesterday, the gate was placed in the incorrect place for the last race. Though we believe that, though we acknowledge that the gate placement is the responsibility of many racing officials on the race course throughout the day, we as stewards ultimately hold ourselves responsible for the integrity of the running of the race and all race day operations. And in regard to this matter, we ultimately hold ourselves responsible for failing to recognize that the gate was placed in the incorrect place.
And the one thing we do want to add is that we do apologise to all connections and the betting public for what happened yesterday. As stewards, we fell well below our expectations and what we expect from ourselves, and we'll ensure with protocols going forward that this won't happen under our watch.
As Victor and Cody stated, there are multiple officials that failed during this instance. There's 8 separate accredited racing officials that are accredited through ROPE, in addition to all of the other participants, upwards of 25 people. We have started effective today, changing the way that we communicate those protocols to our team, and that's something we're going to continue to evolve over the next couple of dark days to make sure that we're in a much better place as we move forward through the rest of the meet and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
We want to, of course, apologize for what happened yesterday, and I appreciate everybody here showing up to discuss the incident, the 12th race from Saturday, August 9th. Thank you for watching.
Kind of an odd video, obviously. Credit to coming forward and being transparent about things. Certainly Andy Serling, the host there, in a difficult position, as a racing on-air talent there for NYRA and for the Fox programming to just kind of lead that procession there. I personally would have liked to see a news reporter and a little bit of talking involved, a little back and forth and questioning, but it was more of a statement, right? More of a release statement, had kind of a hostage video feel to it, right? I mean, you kind of watch them kind of stare into the camera and think about what they were saying as much as, just speaking off the riff and trying to explain more in detail where the pitfalls were. There were no announcements of where the pitfalls were. Human error, more than 25 people involved in the process. Very generic in the explanation. As racing fans, I think we obviously know, and as they had mentioned in there, we deserve better than that. In that particular race, there was almost $1 million in the win play show pool, $993,000. I count up $2.4 million in wagers that could legitimately have been refunded had that race been declared a no contest, which it should have been. In my estimation, there's no way that you can gamble on a race at 1 mile and a 16th or 1 mile and an 1/8, and then the race only run 1 mile and a 16th and consider that in any way, shape, or form fair. A 16th of a mile is 110 yards in distance, give or take the placement of the starting gate for run-up times to the teletimer. This race was at least probably 100 yards shorter than it should have been. I mean, that is a catastrophic, cavernous distance between what was expected and what was run. Not off by a few feet, but by 100 yards. In this instance, I think $2.4 million in wagers should have and could have been refunded. I think the problem was they went official with it before anybody noticed it was the wrong distance, and you've already started paying out people. So kind of the horse is out of the barn, literally and figuratively in that sense, and then they're kind of in damage and spin control. Might they come back sometime here in the next few days and announce some sort of seeded pool to make up for their mistakes, and as a good gesture back towards the betting public? Perhaps they've done that before with some incidents, but this to me, and that would be NYRA seeding the pool, but this goes beyond just the New York Racing Association. You've got stewards who represent various organizations. There are 3 stewards in the booth at racetracks around the country to get a difference in opinion, to get a good debate, and also representation. The 3 stewards in the NYRA Racing Circus, that Saratoga racing circuit, I call it circus, but that might have been a Freudian slip. Braulio Bezia was the steward who was not involved in that video. And I thought it was kind of interesting how Andy Serling thanked them a couple times for showing up, almost feeling a little bit like someone else didn't show up. Braulio Bezia is the veteran of the staff. The years next to the names, he represents the New York Gaming Commission, the state steward for the state of New York. He's been a steward in New York since 2005. Victor Escobar, who spoke first there, formerly a steward in Oklahoma, in New Mexico, in Arizona, just came to NYRA last year in 2024. This is his second year of being a steward in the state of New York. He is the NYRA steward, the New York Racing Association. So he's the one appointed by the track. Baeza was a track representative for many years, and then in recent years became the state representative for the New York Gaming Commission. Cody Watkins, the younger English gentleman that you saw in the video, is a rookie this year. This is his first year as a steward. He's appointed by the Jockey Club, which kind of oversees a lot in American horse racing, from the breed standard to the breed registry and a lot of the, some of the rulings and things like that. The Jockey Club has a big say as a political organization in racing. They are represented with one of the stewards. Now, from what I read, Cody Watkins, 26 years old, from England, in his first year here in the United States, part of a trade program between the Jockey Club in the U.S. and the Jockey Club in the U.K., I have some questions there. Not just his age at 26, which, I've been in the industry longer than both Escobar and Watkins have been born. That is a little concerning to be at this level at Saratoga. Certainly nothing against young people who are exceptional and do a great job and work their way up through and get promoted. Escobar worked at some of the smaller circuits around the U.S. We have seen Watkins was over in the U.K. So it's not like your first job scenario. But when you get to Saratoga, when you get to the New York Racing Association, you get to Kentucky racing, and you're adjudicating races at Churchill Downs, the Kentucky Derby, of these big races. We're talking, this was the same crew that adjudicated the final jewel in the Triple Crown, the Belmont Stakes, and they'll adjudicate the Travers Stakes on Saturday. To me, at that level, when you've got a 3-person team that has a rookie and a second-year person, a part of the crew, that would be like the NBA Finals with multiple officials and go in an extremely young group and not your best and veteran officials. I have a little problem with the lineup of officials, and we have seen some very, very concerning disqualifications or non-disqualifications that didn't seem to have a lot of precedence and merit to them. Not only in New York, but around the country as well. But specifically to New York, we think back to the Zulu Kingdom disqualification just a week or so ago in the Hall of Fame stakes, and how that disqualification made very little sense. Think about the crew. Rookie, second-year person, you're looking for consistency. You don't have it in that crew. And the other person's been a veteran, Baeza has been a veteran of over 20 years. But it's not like you've got 3 peers who have been working together for a long time and making decisions that would be consistent. This would be like getting 3 different home plate umpires on 3 different nights, which you do in Major League Baseball. The strike zone moves, right? And those are the debatable calls. But there shouldn't be any out-safe calls that have anything to do with, judgment. And this is a judgment game here in horse racing when it talks about, making proper decisions and calls. Now, what happened with the starting gate, though, position is not a judgment situation. It is a lack of effort. Period. End of story. There is no other way you can say that many people did not pay attention to the position of the starting gate, cross-check against a diagram that's right on the top of the program page for that particular race. And I think, in my heart of hearts, that the fact that it was the last race on the card had a little bit to do with it. I've been around this game more than 30 years. I've worked in a lot of press boxes, and I can tell you this. Stewards are the first people out the door at the end of the race day. They throw up the official sign on the last race, and they are in a sprint down the hallway. I don't care if I've been in various states around the country. I'm not saying every single one I've ever been with have been that way, but I can't think of any that weren't. So the stewards are kind of hightailing it out of there for the last race. They are the judges. They are the final answer, trying to beat the traffic, get out of there. Obviously they're public figures in there's some maybe fear that they will be, caught up in the crowd after a race day or something like that and have to take some heat for their calls. Most of them are visually anonymous and you've never seen them. Part of NYRA putting a face to the names of these folks, I think, makes a little bit of a difference. Somebody may see this person exiting the racetrack now and question a call. And in this day and age, maybe some security for the stewards on the way out and stick around a little bit more than trying to rush out of there on the last race. I have seen it so many times. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened here, but I am not surprised whatsoever that a laziness effort happened in the last race on a card on a weekend, on a long day like that, on a long Saturday. It's not a shock that it happened in that particular race. So I will leave it at that. I think they've got to do a lot more than just seed a pool with $100,000. Again, $2.4 million could have been refunded. The multi-race wagers going into the last race on the card, by rules from the New York Racing Commission, all of those wagers would have been paid out with an all. So if you had a pick 3, all would have been the payout in the last leg if that race was declared a no contest, as I think it should have been. So all of those would have been covered. There would have been no money lost from the racetrack. You would have just paid out, and instead of getting a 4 of 5 payout, it'd be 5 of 5. You would get all in the last race, and so the payoffs would all be lower, but would be paid pari-mutually, and there'd be no net loss in that situation. All the winners would be paid out. They'd all just be paid out a little bit less because there'd be a lot of folks with all in that last leg. That goes for the pick 3, the pick 4, the pick 5, the pick 6. A daily double wager going to that last race, when a second race of a daily double is not completed, it is a consolation payoff for what you got in the first leg. So there would have been consolation payoffs in the daily double. The only races that are the only wagers that would have been refunded in that situation, if they were on the ball and declared a no contest, would have been the exacta, the tri, the superfecta, the races bet intra race there in the finale, as well as the win, place, and show pool. And to me, looking at the chart from Equibase, that's about $2.4 million, 993,000 of it in the win, place, and show pool, but about $2.4 million would have been refund worthy back to the betting public. I know for sure we're not going to see a $2.4 million marketing, apology. That's obviously not realistic and not going to happen in that fashion. I expect that maybe we'll see a kind of a light offering from NYRA in terms of seeding a pool somewhere, maybe reducing takeouts on a bet if they can do that legally. I doubt that they'll do something that technical because it'll probably take, some rulings and some approval to get done at a state level. So I think, what they've done in the past is seed a pool. So maybe they'll start the pick 5 or the pick 6 one day this next week with additional money into the pool. But again, $2.4 million out the door. I mean, it was paid out to people who won with what was, so it's not like they took the money and ran. So I want to be clear about that. The $2.4 million that was potentially refundable was paid out, and NYRA and the racetrack and the horsemen in their purse account and the state in their tax money got their normal percentages that they would had the race been at 1 1/8 like it should have been. But what I'm saying is that race should have never been declared official when it was only run at 1 1/16 in distance. So a major flub there. It's got to get better on the stewards end. We see it in Southern California as well. Not in the gate placement issue, but we had some really questionable stewards calls that we talked about in this very podcast the week before, the CTBA stakes, and a very light, disqualification at the gate of a long shot winner of the CTBA stakes about 2 weeks ago at Del Mar. That was certainly as questionable as what we saw when Zulu Kingdom was disqualified. We can argue all we want whether a foul was a foul, same way with our officials, same way with our umpires. Was it a ball or a strike? Did the tag get there in time? Did the receiver keep possession and keep a foot inbounds or 2 feet inbounds for the NFL? We can argue all those kind of judgment calls and bang, bang plays. There was nothing bang bang and there was nothing judgment about this gate incident at Saratoga. It was absolute and pure laziness, and that can never be tolerated. That they have to put a policy in place to double check what we're doing. That policy is already there. It had to be there. It's been in place for a century of putting the gate at the right place. So obviously, it's about the humans putting more effort into what they do or being held accountable for what they do. Hard to say that any interaction will be, personnel actions will be taken. I doubt that will be the case. You've got, again, 3 different groups representing the 3 stewards in here. Again, New York Gaming Commission State Steward Braulio Beza. Then you've got Victor Escobar representing the New York Racing Association, which is Saratoga, Aqueduct, and Belmont. And then Cody Watkins representing the Jockey Club as their steward. So you got 3 different organizations that would have to look at things and decide if there were any personnel moves that any one of those individuals was responsible, short of clearing all 3 out, which I don't think nobody agrees on anything in horse racing. So short of clearing all 3 out, I don't know how you make a personnel decision on making one of the 3 a scapegoat. So I doubt we're going to see anything happen to it. The only bottom line is you've got to care more. And that's why I'm making a big deal about it here on this podcast. And I know so many people have made a big deal about it on social media. Had Dave Grenning of the Racing Forum not cared enough, it probably wouldn't even came to their attention for more days to come instead of it coming to their attention almost immediately after the race was declared official. That's a wrap on the They're at the Gate segment here for the podcast. Let's go to our 5th and final topic on It's Official, as it is each and every week. Our stars of tomorrow. We could have talked about Balboa, one of those big Bob Baffert 2-year-old maiden winners that we hinted about earlier in the Mopping Up Del Mar segment. But let's go to Chad Brown in New York. This is the one that really got my attention as a star of tomorrow. Last Friday on August the 8th on the turf, first time starting 2-year-old filly for Chad Brown. Could be next in his major line of Star Turf fillies. Watch this finish in here from Deep Learning.
They're at the top of the stretch. Beach Ballad shifts in a touch. Fraudster up alongside. And Deep Learning is now kicking in with class. Here's Deep Learning on the outside, coming swiftly to inhale the top pair. And what a promising debut for Deep Learning, who strolls in by almost 4 lengths.
Impressive debut under Flavian Pratt, winning by 3 1/4 lengths. 589 the split for the final 16th. Absolutely flying. Went about 23 flat the 4th quarter there. This is a 2-year-old filly with a big future. You think of Lady Eli, Newspaper of Record, Rushing Fall, some of these great 2-year-old fillies that Chad Brown's had his hands on. Maybe this is the next one. Daughter of Cairo Prince, our star of tomorrow, Deep Learning. Now, let's take a look at our topics in review this week on It's Official. We started things out with our Goosebump Award. That went to Doncho in a world record performance. First time turf sprinting, 5.5 on the turf, and 59.75 at Ellis Park. Doncho, this week's Goosebump Award winner. Our turf division's low wattage stars came out of the Arlington Million and the Sword Dancer. The Americans just don't seem to have it this year on the turf, but Rebels Romance, we got to see him win in Germany, his 4th Group 1 win in Germany, his 8th Group 1 win overall in winning the Grand Prix of Berlin. Big effort from Rebels Romance. Hopefully we'll see him back in the Breeders' Cup trying to win for a 3rd time in the turf division. Bob Baffert's just mopping up the competition at Del Mar with his 2-year-olds. 6 wins at the meet, including the couple stakes wins this past weekend. The Best Pal to Desert Gate, the Sorrento Stakes to Hamika, and Bob Baffert has now won 8 races in a row at Del Mar, going for 9 when racing resumes there on Thursday. They're at the gate. We went in depth talking about the situation at the starting gate at Saratoga with the final race on Saturday, what happened, why it happened, and what might have been behind it, and what they might do moving forward. And finally, our star of tomorrow, Deep Learning for trainer Chad Brown. Impressive 2-year-old filly rallying to win on the turf last Friday, August the 8th. Those 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I say so. That's how we play the game. We'll re-rack it with 5 new topics next week on the Tuesday podcast. But between now and then, be sure to join Scott Shapiro, our guest handicapper on the First Call podcast. He and I will reconvene on Friday to handicap 8 stakes races coming up for this weekend. Great racing around the country. Saratoga and Del Mar stay in the spotlight. And we're just 2 weeks out from the Travers Stakes now, so a really hot time of summer. We'll talk to you on Friday.